we're heading back into the Chronicles of Darkness, the alternate universe of pervasive horror and supernatural threats. Fall always seems the appropriate time to discuss these things. And while we did discuss the base Chronicles of Darkness that invites players into this world to be investigators or just unlucky passers-by to the terrors around them, perhaps maybe even wielding some minor supernatural powers of their own, Onyx Path Publishing, with White Wolf and all that kind of stuff, has several lines of books for those who want to be the monsters themselves. And none, of course, are more iconic than vampires. Today we're going to talk about Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition. As a quick reminder that White Wolf Publishing owns the IPs for this, so you actually have two setups. You have Vampire the Masquerade, which is owned and created by White Wolf Publishing, and then you have Onyx Path Publishing, who licenses the Vampire and other World of Darkness stuff to create two different versions. So Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition just came out, when I recorded this video, and I'll be covering that when I finally have a chance to really dig into it and perhaps even have a chance to play it or run it. But for now, we're going to talk about Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition. That's with the Chronicles of Darkness, which we've already covered in previous videos. And we'll also continue going on for more of the Chronicles of Darkness stuff. These are completely different systems with different rules and some slightly different lore. There will be some similarities, but we'll act as if these are completely different things and not try and cross the streams. One of the biggest reasons that I enjoy the Chronicles of Darkness series of books is because, especially with 2nd edition, they are all designed to join in and work together, and they all speak the same language in terms of rules and conditions and multipliers and effects, allowing you to actually combine across lines, whether that as you have a player who wants to be a vampire and a player who wants to be a werewolf, and how do they mesh? How do they bump heads? How do they fight each other? As well as what allows them to get along, or to bring in werewolf antagonist to your party, your coterie of vampires. We'll talk about more of this as we get into other books, and especially when we get to Beast, which is very much designed to work with the other book series. In terms of setting, like I said, this is Chronicles of Darkness, so it is our world just with an alternate universe. Vampire the Requiem takes place in this dark mirror of our own, and you can set the story in your own hometown, in a famous one that you know of, like New York City is a big popular one, or the book actually provides a number of cities with their own built-up lore and background. In the book itself, of course, a lot of these are famous cities like New York and Seoul and stuff like London, Paris, all that kind of stuff. Thematically speaking, Vampire the Requiem is very much about you are now a monster, but how you handle that. Do you dive straight into, well, I'm a vampire now, I'm going to start murdering anything I see, I don't care about humanity, I've already moved past them. That is a quick slide down to basically turning into a vile monster that is out of control and nobody wants to be around. And you can totally enjoy that. It's actually probably a good thing for like a short arc of what happens when somebody goes bad. You'll probably be put down by an elder vampire who thinks you're a threat to the nice little setup that they've got, but it would be a fun little adventure. Or do you try and hang on to your humanity for a while? Do you fight to, stay human, or at least as human as you can? You have touchstones that are basically the link back to your old life, or if you are an elder vampire, hundreds of years old, you're obviously probably not still in touch with your family and friends, but maybe there was that one guy that you chased and you bit him, but he got away, and for some reason you just kept up with him, following him, and then his grandchildren, and just kind of poking in and seeing what they're doing. That is your connection to the humans that continue on while you just stay stagnant in the stream of time. Within the party, you can definitely have some different feelings about humanity. Humanity is specifically a stat in Vampire the Requiem, where normal people had integrity and they had breaking points in the previous video that we covered, vampires actually track their humanity. Basically, how in control of themselves, how in touch with people around them they are, and by people I mean humanity, not other vampires, or have they debased themselves and dropped down into just being a feral beast, or just you're just so old and just out of touch, you don't even know what humanity is beyond food. Within the party itself, you can probably have a lot of different interactions of how people want to continue. There may be some people who are like, no, I turned into a vampire, but my family and friends are still out there. I still have kids in school, and I'm still trying to balance that life. I lie to my spouse and tell them that, I have a night job now, so I sleep through the day and work all night, or something like that. You lie. You come up with something to make it all work, where others might be like, no, I have no connections to humanity, so I just do what I wish. And then you may have some people who are like, yeah, I'm a vampire, but I'm not going to eat normal people. I'm going to hunt down muggers in alleys. I'm going to be the anti-hero. If I've got to eat people, I'm going to eat the bad people. I may have a particular opinion, but we'll move on. In terms of character creation, you follow the same rules as a normal Chronicles of Darkness character. Again, go check out that book, where you basically set up your priority of physical, mental, and social traits, attributes, as well as with skills. And then you applied the vampire template, which does things like, okay, we're going to take integrity out, we're going to slot humanity in. You have some built-in bonuses. You don't really care about bashing damage as much as a human. If you were maxed out on your health bar with bashing damage, well, you've just been beaten up and up, you fall unconscious. Sorry, buddy. As a vampire, no. You don't care about that. Now, you do care about fire a lot more than normal people do. Sunlight is a problem. So you have all those different things that are applied to you. And then you have to pick 2 things minimum, though there's some wiggle room depending on your character creation. You need to pick your clan. This is the bloodline that you're descended from. And then you need to pick a covenant, which is basically a social group that you join. Now, I say you have to. Technically, you don't have to. You could be, in the case of not picking a clan, you could be what is called a thin blood in the case of somebody who they're kind of weak. They don't have a lot of power. Or maybe you're playing a ghoul, and you are the daylight minion of a vampire, perhaps one of the other party members who's fed you a little vampire blood. You're superhuman, but you don't have the same weaknesses. That's kind of an addiction, and they have some mental control over you. Interesting characters, all not necessarily having a bloodline, a clan. And the same thing with the covenants. Covenants are social circles that you've joined, while the clan is your bloodline, and you're kind of in there as soon as you're bitten and fed blood, and you have that whole becoming a vampire thing. The covenants are different groups of people that, this is how they spend their time. This is how they organize and work with each other. To go over clans real quickly, now these are just the ones that are in the core book. There are obviously other ones. You can make them up. You've got a lot of leeway, but these are the ones presented in the base book for the 2nd edition game. You have the Deva, also known as the Serpents, and these are your kind of classic super sexy vampires who are alluring and dangerous, and the thing is they're just as likely to be hooked on a mortal and get emotionally dependent on them. So they are very, very vulnerable to the very people that they're drawing in and giving things. They can find themselves emotionally attached to them. And these guys, when I say they're the sexy vampires, you could be Bruce Wayne, millionaire, or very Tyler Durden, down in the dirt, charming, but you don't quite know why kind of characters. Basically, they're very much the I'm going to give you stuff, and then you're going to give me stuff kind of vampire. You have the gangrel, also known as the savages, and these are your in touch with the beast kind of vampires. They're primitive, they're very feral, they're the alpha wolves of the clan, but they could just as easily be more of the conniving scavengers and, you know, on the edge of society watching things. And they lose themselves to the beast, which is the frenzy, the need to lash out. But they also get along really well with other beasts in the world. They can communicate, call wolves to them, things of that nature. These are the bikers in leathers and stuff like that with the, you know, spiked up baseball bat. Hey, baseball bat. And they're your more primitive, long-haired kind of wild vampires. You have the Mekhet, or the shadows. These are the magical, in your head, knowing what you're about to do vampires. They see things, they know things, they're very hidden and quiet, and they also suffer the most from being in sunlight and fire and falling asleep and not waking up for a couple weeks or months when they run out of blood. They are the spooky, sneaky kind of vampires. On the flip side, you have the Nosferatu, who are equally sneaky and hidey. But that is because they are, like the classic movie, misshapen, wrong, nasty, weird. They are terrible to look at, or maybe there's just something wrong with them. Shadows wiggle even while they're standing still, or their voice doesn't quite line up with their lips, or you just hear weird whispering whenever they're nearby. Something just is wrong about them. They don't get along socially with anything or anyone. They can be intimidating, but when it comes to asking please and thank you or telling a lie, they just don't. It doesn't work. They instead rely on being the terrible, scary things in the dark. And then you have Clan Ventru. These are the lords, the masters of the night, the schemers, planners, and puppeteers. They don't seduce and make deals. They command and control. Look into my eyes and do as I tell you. Each of the clans have preferred stats. They have preferred disciplines, which are these special vampire powers. We'll get to those. And so they kind of fall into certain categories. They each have their own special bane. Like I said, some people catch fire easily. Some people just can't do social stuff, that kind of things. Each with their own little thing. We won't dig into those too much just because there's a lot of variety. And banes are another thing that end up getting heaped on as you play, depending on how humane you stay. If you start to delve down, you get other banes piled on top of you, like the classic being afraid of garlic or crosses and things like that. As for covenants, these are the social groups that you join, and they fall into a couple different categories in regards to each other and how they treat humanity. And kind of going through these more or less alphabetically, you have the Carthian movement. This is also known as the Revolution, the Movement, Firebrands, or the Vermin. These are the young vampires, generally speaking, who want a new vampire world order. They want to take power from ancient elders who have been around for forever and are kind of out of touch with society and have these long plans. And let's move it down to the masses. Let's get more democratic with it. And because the elders can be, they plan for centuries and then they go mad and they fall asleep and it's hard to handle them. And they are also really powerful and scary. Generally speaking, the Carthian movement vampires, they're always involved in some kind of project, some new ideology, and when they take over an area and ascend to power, well, power corrupts. And the Carthian movement, even if they're in power, they look and they realize, well, we done screwed up again. Well, that's fine. Let's set everything on fire and we'll just try it again with new leaders. The Circle of the CRONE, also known as the Acolytes, the Mother's Army, the Witches, are not necessarily all women, but there's lots of witchiness going on here, guys. Vampires that have basically given into free-wielding freewheeling wildness, blood sorcery, paganism, rituals. They run cults of personality or occult study groups. The strong rule at a whim, and when they're not in power, they organize and strike other leaders with a passion and are absolutely okay being loud and wild about it. These are people, vampires, who have given into their cravings and their needs and the thirst for power, and they have crazy blood sorcery to really push everything. So do not care about humanity other than its food. The Invictus are they're the first estate. They're the man, the conspiracy of silence, the establishment. These are the long-running leadership of vampires back all the way to Rome, to what, if you've played in other games, the Camarilla used to be. This is the small group that survived the Camarilla falling apart. And basically, they're the maintainers and creators of the Masquerade, the whole hiding vampires from existence and not just taking over everything because humanity might turn against them. They are the Vampire Illuminati, the established hierarchy, actually within the majority of the world in terms of vampire society. They rule from the shadows. They maintain law and order for the past 2 millennia or so, no big deal. But they're also not afraid to break their own laws if need be, and then they'll send an underling down lower in the hierarchy to go clean up the mess and act like it never happened. This is the part where my lack of Latin classes back in high school may show up, but the LANCEA et SANCTUM, the sanctified, the church eternal, the second estate, or just the judges, are the other half of the Invictus. They don't tend to try and rule areas the way the Invictus does, and they kind of get along because where the Invictus is the government, the LANCEA et SANCTUM are the vampire church. It's very weird. These guys are kind of cringy. The ones who created the Masquerade, they are the vampire church, and they're the moral center of vampires. They basically are masters of Theban, kind of ancient Egyptian sorcery, and they are also the archivists of ancient lore, basically drawing it all in and deciding this is safe to let other people see, and this is something that we're just not going to let anybody know about. And they also tempt the Catholic Church, the church at large, in daylight, to keep it pure. So they offer the preacher a chance to steal funds from a orphan charity, and if he does, well, then they're probably going to eat him. But they're just doing it to keep those people good while the vampires themselves suffer. They're kind of nutty. And then you have the Ordo DRACUL, and while the other groups are very much about kind of gaining power, or at least getting enough power that they're, able to do what they want, the Ordo DRACUL, also known as the Defiant, the Dragons, or just the Order, don't really care about ruling. They care about themselves and building themselves up. Basically, these are archaeologists, adventurers, occultists, and what are they after? They seek knowledge to make themselves greater. How they do that, well, is kind of depending on what organization in the Ordo DRACUL they follow, but they basically want to make themselves immune to sunlight, or at least highly resistant to it, or to make massive legions of followers bound to their blood, or any number of wild, crazy stuff. But it's all internal. It's all investigative and finding ancient knowledge, and they often tend to seek out places of power and other creatures like werewolves, mages, fairies, ghosts, stuff like that, just to see what they can find, and hey, maybe we can use this, or well, we're going to do an experiment with this, and all about experimenting with their blood, making themselves stronger, and spreading that knowledge around kind of freely, at least within their own order. Once you have a clan and a covenant kind of figured out, and you've organized where you are in the society of vampires, you also need to figure out your mask and your dirge. Similar to the vice and virtue that you had as a human, these are basically the two halves of your personality now. The mask is the thing that you show to the humanity, and basically you live out kind of, not obviously in the daylight hours, but amongst the prey. And then the dirge is what you show to the all-night society, the vampires, and how they see you. And these can be things that range from being, the obedient lackey to being a very orderly, a scholar and investigating things. Very large variety of stuff, and this factors into your ability to recover willpower. Rounding back to humanity, you basically, as a new vampire, start at rank 7 of 10, and you have room to grow and become more humane, and you have a little leeway before you become a useless monster. And you can buy ranks up to be more and more humane with XP, or try and just maintain based on your actions. One of the things that help you stay grounded are your touchstones. And we touched on these a little bit earlier, but these are things that remind you of what it was when you used to be human. As a new vampire, their recent attachments, family, friends, the place you were born, and as an older vampire, it's the memories of past vampire events and your interactions with humanity are super important, because when you lose your last touchstone, even if you're a very, very high level of humanity, still maybe in 5s or 6s, if you've lost your last touchstone, you become languid, and you just don't really care anymore, and eventually you will fall away into torpor and go to sleep for a while. As a low-level young vampire, this actually probably only lasts for maybe a day or two, but as you become more and more powerful, the sleep might last longer and longer into years, decades, centuries. But this can be a useful thing, because as you are in torpor, you lose blood potency, or can, which is basically the I don't know, coagulation of vampire blood. I don't know how you want to put it, but how potent your blood is. Blood potency, but it's it gives you bonuses, but it also has the negatives of, after a certain level, you no longer get any sustenance from eating humans. You need to drink blood from other vampires, which has a lot of problems in the fact that you might become addicted and vulnerable to that particular vampire. This is actually something the Order of DRACUL is trying to figure out. And all that set up, you now have a vampire with certain bonuses and things like that, and you need to pick out disciplines. And these are wide-ranging. We'll not go into all of them, but they cover things like auspex, which is your perception around you, and basically being able to see just a few seconds into the future, or realize somebody's sneaking up behind you. You have animalism, which is your interaction with animals, including the ability to raise a little animal familiars. So you have a little, dead dog ally. Or protean, which is your kind of shape-shifting ability, turning into gas, giving yourself huge claws. Domination, to just look people in the eye and command them. Majesty, so you are the biggest, best, coolest thing in the club, or most terrifying. Obfuscation, so you can become invisible or hide yourself or just cloak things from being seen. The variety is huge, and that's not including things like blood sorcery from the Circle of CRONE, Theban sorcery from the LANCEA et SANCTUM. I'm terrible. Or some of the coils and scales of the Ordo DRACUL, all of which have different powers and requirements, and a broad variety of stuff. And then you also have devotions, which are your linkages of skills. So if you have, say, the classic one, auspex and celerity, super speed and crazy perception, all of a sudden now you are doing things like dodging bullets or acting before somebody actually pulls the trigger, things of that nature, where you're combining skills together to create kind of team-up stuff within your own powers. Now, the one thing to touch on for the Game Master side of, because a lot of people are going to go, well, you're a vampire. Who else do you have to fight? I mean, you have vampires, and then you have werewolves, because those are the only guys who ever, fight. Thanks, Underworld. We appreciate the movie, but that's kind of been our thing set in stone. Well, Vampire the Requiem introduces the Strix, where vampires are, we tend to think of them as, bats and wolves. The Strix are owls. I'm keeping that in. The Strix are owl spirit things of shadow. Where vampires once were human, Strix never were. They're these creatures from the shadow that hate vampires. They eat vampires. They want to destroy vampires. Some of them you can kind of interact with and are, for whatever reason, hunting other Strix. Other ones want to infiltrate vampire society to figure out what vampires are up to. And other ones are literally just going around and going, vampires, I'm going to eat you. So these are the predators of the night. Vampires are vulnerable to sunlight and fire, and they will burn you or wound you. Strix cannot even pass into daylight. It is a solid barrier to them. So they ride along and possess humans or other vampires. And so there may be a vampire possessed by a Strix right there in your nice little meeting in your creepy vampire nightclub, and you would never know. So there are things out there that hunt the vampires even. Hopefully I've kept this short but informative, because hopefully I will get this recording now, edited and out, and I will be following up with a number of the Onyx Path Chronicles of Darkness books. I've got Werewolf up next. We'll hit Mage, which is my personal favorite, Changeling, which it's kind of growing on me, Promethean, and Beast. And we're going to try and hit all those very, very quickly for the fall creepy horror season. And then we'll jump over to check out some other different book series, and then we may come back here to check out like Vampire the Masquerade and talk about the differences between Vampire Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem. Whew, okay. As always, guys, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have some corrections from your own play time, hey, post it in the comments. I'd love to see what other people are up to with this kind of stuff. And if there is a game system that you're like, man, I've been checking this out, what do you know about it? I'll try and help you out. Until next time, keep rolling dice.